I've never been the type to make enemies. I always thought that about myself. But considering the current situation, it seems that just by breathing, one can somehow make enemies. This crossed my mind when I received the official notice from the director, Steve. My name is James. I'm a 36-year-old mid-level employee at a construction company. I got a job at a well-known local construction firm right after high school. My parents were thrilled when I landed the job, as it was a reputable company in our area. I chose not to go to college simply because I wanted to start earning money as soon as possible. I have 4 younger brothers. It was only natural for me as the eldest to want to help support my parents financially. I was never particularly fond of studying and had no real interest in pursuing a college degree. My first year on the job was like a crash course in life, so busy I can hardly remember it. Though the workplace was demanding, I found it fulfilling. I was the only high school graduate to join the company that year. I could feel the gap I had to bridge from the very first day of work. Luckily, I was surrounded by supportive colleagues. No one looked down on me for being a high school graduate back then. When I first joined the company, there wasn't anyone like that. By the time I was 28, I had grown to be known as one of the most promising of my peers. One day, Mr. Smith, a client, suggested I consider a matchmaking. Mr. Smith, a close friend of our CEO Mr. Anderson, and a client, always had a soft spot for me, having joined the company straight out of high school. I learned everything from how to drink to high-end dining etiquette from Mr. Smith. I often visited Mr. Smith's home with Mr. Anderson. I couldn't possibly refuse the matchmaking proposal from Mr. Smith, especially since the other party was Mr. Smith's daughter. While the term CEO's daughter might conjure an image of a demure and delicate lady, Charlotte was anything but the stereotypical executive's daughter. She graduated from an industrial high school with a major in architecture and studied urban design engineering in college. I've seen her at construction sites, asking the workers various questions. Unconcerned about messing up her hair, she'd wear a safety helmet and observe passionately. I first met her at a construction site. She was visiting the site I was assisting as a site supervisor. I believe it was when she was still in high school, dressed in her uniform, wearing a white helmet. She greeted me politely. I heard that her well-composed features resemble her mother's. Her name is Charlotte. When she found out I was the assistant site supervisor, her large eyes widened even more in surprise. As we bumped into each other at various sites, we started to share personal stories. Having 4 younger brothers, Charlotte's presence felt like having a sister, and I was glad she came to rely on me for many things. To me, she was always Mr. Smith's precious daughter and like a sister. We both knew there was mutual affection. But crossing that line seemed like a difficult choice for both of us. The matchmaking proposal came up in Charlotte's graduating year from college. Yes, I would like to proceed with the matchmaking. I responded immediately to Mr. Smith's proposal. I remember being genuinely happy that the time had come when we no longer had to hide our feelings for each other. But this is where life gets tricky. The news of my matchmaking with Mr. Smith's daughter spread quickly within the company. While all my peers congratulated me, there were some who didn't take it well. I was a bit carried away and completely forgot about them. And that's when I was plunged into hell. I'll never forget it. It was the day before the arranged marriage meeting. When Al from my department told me to go to the director's office, I had a bad feeling. Steve, the son of Mr. Anderson, has never gotten along with me. Probably because Mr. Anderson and Mr. Smith treated me like a son, which Steve didn't like. Mr. Anderson once said, "Steve has always been rebellious, but his attitude in the company is also bad. He's created his own faction within the company, and lately, He's been opposing everything Mr. Anderson does. Unfortunately, many in the company have been won over by Steve, and those of us loyal to Mr. Anderson fear to take over might be happening. After a brief knock, I called out and received a brusque "come in response. Inside the director's office, Steve and some executives were lined up. "I'm sorry to say this right before your meeting with Charlotte from the Smith family, but could you go to branch 13? Steve said with a spiteful smile. I was so taken aback I could only utter a dumbfounded "huh." Branch 13 is a remote southern island, far from headquarters. This wasn't just a transfer, it was a demotion. Steve watched my reaction with amusement, while his cronies snickered and laughed behind me. I realized then that this was a done deal. Mr. Anderson has been hospitalized due to illness since last month. This transfer must have been forcefully arranged by Steve. I clenched my fists, determined to stay calm. I refused to show any sign of distress. I accepted the official notice as if it were nothing and left the director's office. Inside, I was seething with anger. Thus, on the eve of my long-anticipated meeting with Charlotte, I faced this unfortunate demotion. One should never make someone hold a grudge against you. On the day of the arranged meeting, leaving Charlotte in tears was the lowest I've ever felt. I hadn't been in touch with Mr. Smith since then. It's been 8 years since I was transferred to this remote island branch. There's been no sign of returning to headquarters, especially since Mr. Anderson passed away 3 years ago. Now, Steve, the one who banished me here, is the CEO. It seems my peers who were loyal to Mr. Anderson were suddenly fired. They probably thought I couldn't do anything from this island. I wasn't fired, but here I remain. Mornings come early on the island. Since coming here, I've taken up surfing. There's a shallow beach with good waves, attracting many tourists for surfing. With few other industries, the island relies on tourism. My work involves the construction of small resort hotels, villas, and pensions, among other things. There's also a fair amount of repair work, keeping us reasonably busy. The branch office consists of me, 2 young craftsmen, and 1 local administrative worker. The atmosphere here is relaxed and friendly. The peace here is unbelievable, considering how at headquarters there were constant clashes between Steve's faction and those loyal to Mr. Anderson. After 8 years, I've grown accustomed to this peaceful life and have started dreading the idea of returning to headquarters. Before work, I head to the sea and catch a few waves before going to the office. And during lunch, I gaze at the calm sea. Lately, I've had more desk work, so I make a point of looking out at the distant view, which makes me seem like I'm always staring out the window. James, you're staring at the sea again. Clara, the administrative worker, often teases me. When I first arrived, I felt anxious and lonely. Not to mention guilty for abruptly canceling on Charlotte. But with 8 years gone by, even that feeling has faded. By now, she must be around 30 years old. She's probably built a wonderful life with a great husband. The thought still occasionally stings deep in my heart. Sometimes it feels like a minor wound, other times it's a deep, sinking feeling. Well, they say time heals all wounds. With time, these feelings should fade away. I just haven't given it enough time yet. Every time that twinge of pain hits my heart, I remind myself of this. Looks like you've got a slow day. The one who called out to me as I was absently gazing out the window was Ethan. He's a reliable older brother figure, 2 years my senior, who moved to this remote island. He runs a small ranch and offers horseback riding to tourists. Sometimes, he hosts students who are truant from school or children with certain issues for extended stays at his ranch. They engage in horse care and receive horse therapy, healing their wounded hearts. If you don't have work, Why not take the day off? He teased me, and I retorted, I do